fit here on the continuum. So that's just something that
Okay,
changes.
the second question, in communications theory, you can go online and you can research what exactly linear and circular
Right.
means. And I think it's Trompenauer's also.
There's a lot of stuff on it.
There's a lot, but I think they were borrowing from the literature and using that terminology. But that's a very valid point. This was written by 6 researchers, all 5 Japanese and 1 Chinese, who helped with the data collection. Okay, all fairly bilingual.
They only
Was it
had
in
2
English or in
Chinese groups,
Chinese?
right?
No,
There was only 2 Chinese groups. How many groups were there?
the same
Chinese
number of
speaking?
groups
In each case?
In each
5.
case, yes.
Okay.
So this was two-part study. In the first part, they reviewed TV dramas in each country, and they were looking for particular type of speech patterns. For example, how often Americans apologize in the drama, or how often Japanese apologize, and so there was a whole other section of this research that they did, and some of that crept into their interpretation, I believe, right? Okay. But I will try to make a link available. I could not find a legitimate link, so. But I can show you the original report. If anybody's interested, you can take a look at it. Okay? Is that
But I would say
questions?
at the end, even though we're unsure of all of the uncertainties, the categories generally seemed right.
Okay.
So even though the methodology might not be sound or the groups might have been narrow, looking sort of at the high level, at least from the U.S.-Japan point of view, we don't have Chinese representative here, but they did seem to feel right as general.
Right, or you mean like useful in terms of?
Both. I would
okay.
say a good description of how people tend to communicate in that culture,
Okay.
and useful when communicating with people in that culture in general. Using it as a starting point, and then obviously you have to adjust based on the people you have in your group.
Okay.
We didn't dispute the findings, maybe the methodology.
Okay. Okay.
I think one of the Japanese academics in this is trilingual, and I don't know the others, but they're all bilingual.
English, Japanese.
English, Japanese. And I don't know that this was done in Japanese or in English. They don't
Right.
say what the language of discussion on the tables were.
And
So
that could have an
I'm going to
effect too.
guess that the
Yeah.
Chinese were speaking in Chinese and the Japanese were speaking in Japanese, because those are the 2 main languages of the people who did the research.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. This was not a test of their English ability.
Right.
So discussions were done in their native language.
Because language has an impact on style.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Okay. Yes.
But your point on the methodology of displaying the information, it's the complexity of the software that you need to use to do that. That you're saying. I think what you were talking about, the continuum and looking at it from a different perspective, is I would expect they would have done that because it had more analog perspective on it. And if Japanese are dominant analog processors, out of the 5 professors that were Japanese or 4, that should have come up, I would have normally assumed. But I think the cost probably involved, or the lack of software involved, or the complexity of doing that may have inhibited that. But it would have made it much more interesting visually to
Right.
see. And probably a little bit, because you're looking at something with, this is yes, no. Right kind of a situation, you hit or you miss. But what you're talking about is actually more real.
Exactly.
Right.
And
So what they observed it, or they didn't observe it?
Exactly. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think that's a little bit more helpful in real communication. You go in with that, like here, if a person reads this and they think linear, and they go in a Japanese setting and it's not going linear, they might go right away to circular. Instead of trying to gauge the people in the group and then toning down the level of the people in the group to find the right climate or the right level for the people in the group. So that's why I'm focusing on the right in the box because either this or that, either this or that, either directive or not.
Nothing between.
Right.
Exactly. That's the interpretation, right?
Right.
They interpreted the data this way.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. How about middle group here?
You guys are very talkative. Talkative group.
Good observation. Unfortunately, it's more unrelated. Yeah, you're kind of focused on the kind of definition of words, civic agreement. So we understand support and reason, but like what is back channel?
Okay.
We assume it's a kind of nebawashi,
Yep.
pre-negotiation before a meeting. So no need for a negotiation. What is the next? Participation. Like we say context-based.
Right.
We're not sure. Is it like so? If you have elderly and young people in Japan, for respect, elderly people more speak a lot, and younger so kind of listen. Is that what the context means? And the last one for the first question is a metaphor for Chinese, like what is soaring tower? How do you build a tower? Kind of thing.
I just raised one thing over the agreement part. Like, in an Asian country that it's both written back channel, but is it possible that if you bring such kind of idea in America, how does it work? I mean, is it work or not? And if work, then in which way? If it's not, in why? I just kind of curious on that.
You saying, the question is, does back channel work in the United States?
Yeah.
It sure as hell does.
They call lobbyists. Lobbyists.
And it's not
very expensive.
when you go into a meeting in an American company, you've got an opinion. You want something decided in this way. That you go around to all the people you can get a hold of and work it out with them that they agree with you before the meeting starts.
Oh.
You want to get them ticked off, right? So they're going to support you in the meeting. But you never know when the meeting comes up what they're going to do. But you try and collect as much support before you go to a meeting. So nebawashi in that sense is not unknown in the West. But on less formal meetings, we're within a single department and stuff, there's some discussion amongst different participants. What do you think? And you get the feedback and so forth. So there's preparation for meetings, but not as much as there is in Japan. And it's not formalized. So the academics don't recognize it. So they never talk about it in any of the research studies. And Paul's an academic, but he's not an academic. He's a businessman who happens to have an MBA. All right?
I don't have an MBA. I do not have
Okay, you got a master's degree. All right. I'm a carpenter, so so we don't come from that particular family of thought. So the point that you make is a very good point. It's there.
Okay, but it's like not so much obvious or not so much not the main point. I mean, in Asian country, it's like main point that we have to do it, but not in mandatory stuff. That
Yes, and in many cases it's not expected. It's done for people are shocked to find out that these guys have formed a group. But there are politics within any company. Exist. Every company in the world has politics, internal politics. So when you're looking for budget, you're looking for money, and you want to grab as much money as you can because budget is power. The guy with the biggest budget for his department is the most powerful guy in the group. So they want to get power.
There's a story I always tell, maybe you've heard it before if you've come a few times, which is about the American manager comes to his Japanese staff and says, I have this idea for improvement. He explains his idea, a little bit of discussion, says, okay, we're gonna do it, okay? He goes back to his office, and then one by one, the member came in and is like, oh yeah, Bucho, but I think maybe we have to consider this. The next person comes in and says, oh yeah, but in the meeting you said this, but I think we have to reconsider this. So he thought he got agreement, everybody agreed with his idea. The meeting was over, And then nobody agreed with his, but they came to him one by one, maybe to save his face or something, but they didn't agree. They hadn't agreed in the meeting.
I see.
Okay,
So
But-
on that, if
that would be back channel.
Okay, but if I understand well that in Asian country, if they have back channel, it's like almost settled with the answer as well. But in that sense, that it's not the settled answer, but like just have a connection before the meeting, if understood well. That's like.
So there's a big problem in translating, I think, the definition of meeting, kaigi. So there are formal meetings in America, board meetings, and there are very procedural, and everything has been decided beforehand. And there are less formal meetings, but I think Japanese, for our purpose, when we discuss, I think you should think more of the nemawashi style meeting. Not the formal meeting where everybody gets together and
Bucho inai.
or between bucho, right? So one bucho goes to the other bucho's desk, or three bucho get together and just. That's more the meetings that we're talking about here. I don't think we have. I think maybe I'm wrong, but oftentimes when we mention meetings in English, you're thinking more of the formal meeting.
Right.
But really, meeting just means three people hanging around the water cooler discussing, what they're going to do.
In Japanese companies, you've got the open office, right? Whereas in American companies, all the managers behind closed doors, or most of them anyway, and the window and everything else. But in Japanese, you've got the guy sitting in front of the window and everybody down the row. So I spend a lot of time. You spend a lot of time in Japanese companies. The conversations you have when you go to her desk and talk about something, everybody within about 4 meters on both sides can hear exactly what you're saying. So that's a kind of meeting, right? And that's really informal. It's a little bit cozy because you're just talking to one person or maybe two people who share a desk. So that's also a kind of meeting in Japan.
Okay. Okay. Back channel consent. I'm sorry, context based. Situational context based on the situation. Right. So in
situation based on the participation, I don't really understand well what.
So maybe Gordon can weigh in here a little bit too. But if part of context is also who you are in the meeting. If I'm the bucho, that's context. People are concerned about who is the bucho, that's part of the context, right? So when it's talking about participation active, well, who's expected to be active in an American meeting? Basically everybody, perhaps. But if in certain contexts, in many meeting situations in Japan, the context is, I'm Kacho, I keep my mouth shut in this meeting, and I talk to my bucho about it later, right? That could be part of context.
It also means that Japanese could be either formal or active, depending on the context.
Right.
That's what they mean by context. So what we got here is a process. Participation means protest. Process. Whether it's an active process or formal process. But in Japan, they have a variety. You have a variety of processes that you use depending on the context. But Americans tend to do the same way all the time. Now, I don't have enough experience in China to say that Chinese do it all the same way all the time. But in this study, they did the same way all the time.
More flexible in a way.
Yeah, Japanese are so flexible.
I'm not sure positively always, but yeah.
Okay. And did I miss any? Soaring tower?
Last one.
Yeah, I can only guess what the metaphor. I can only have my own interpretation. But I think it's that the one person takes the meeting and stands out. So the
Power distance.
power distance,
Right,
perhaps.
the higher the power, the greater the distance to the next one down.
Somewhere.
For soaring, it's the different kind of base. So the way that we were talking about it is with the building blocks, the goal is up. And different people are adding the blocks and based on logic, taking them away. And the base can be very wide, but still people are adding the blocks to get to the goal. Whereas the soaring tower, they have 4 bases. So the base of it is very narrow, but then people are still building up to it. And then for the floating boat, the destination is actually horizontal, it's not vertical. So that's the destination, and the Japanese will and get there, but get to the destination. So that is the sort of imagery for the 3 different types.
The image I always use with the opposite of floating boat kind of is, you know, don't rock the boat. Right? If you rock it too much, somebody goes in the water.
Or the whole boat sinks.
Right? So there's a lot of risk, maybe, even you know, which happens in America as well, right? You open your mouth too much, they might throw you out of the boat.
Or not invite you to the
But,
next time.
but also the relationship. You don't, you want to, you're in the boat together, right? You have to you're going to have to live in that boat for a while. So, you know, how much do you want to argue, you know? You have to get along together. Maybe that's the metaphor of the floating boat. Somebody's interpretation was it's just there and it's just floating around without direction, right? So that's another interpretation. Right? Okay.
In that study, they say at one point that in Japan, modesty, humility, suppression of self are considered to be moral ideals. Okay? So if modesty, humility, suppression of self are considered to be moral ideals, then you can understand how they would process in a boat, as opposed to building a tower.
Yeah, that's a big topic because what he's talking about now is the underlying values. Right.
Yeah, this is the perception of the people who did the study.
Yeah.
That's what they drew.
That's what they
the
said.
conclusion.
That's right.
But can I ask one thing? Do you think
No.
it's yeah, that's the typical reply that I get it all the way. But anyway, do you think that's kind of their conclusion? I mean, the personality, the ideal, or what they describe, what you say right now is it's okay, or I mean.
Well, it's like the gentleman in the corner said, we don't know what the study was. So I know some of these people, not closely, but I know them. I belong to an association that includes some of these people are members of. They're all professionals in this field. So they came into the study with some previously held understandings. As an academic, it's the ability to separate your. Are you researching to prove your point that you already understand, or are you researching to find out something? And there's a combination of both. So I have no idea as to how much they were influenced by the previous research that they learned when they went to school or that they teach in their other classes.
A third of the study was literature review, meaning in a research study you review all of the recent research and studies on this topic. So it's not it's very contextual.
But basically, this conforms to the general understanding of the stereotypical Japanese. This is tradition. But I'll tell you something. Culture isn't static. Right? It's changing constantly.
Yeah.
And I have an 18-year-old son, and I'll tell you, he does not represent my culture. Right? So in the past is the nail that stands up gets hammered down. So by the time he gets to be 40, he's going to be more like me. But that isn't working today because the social media has changed a huge amount of things. Right? And the amount of internet exposure and looking at visuals as well, a lot of visualization on the internet, that the culture's changed. And also the American culture is changing drastically because of all of that.
Let's save speculation for the beers. Speculating about the
Yes, sir. I envision he's at about 454 right now, and I'm down about B1 or B2.
But I want to go to the last group, and then what time is it? 5:20. Oh wow. Okay. So I want to get to the last group, and then the most important thing I want to leave us with, so that we can discuss it, is then, so what? How are you going to? Can you use anything we did today to make a change in your communication style, or, is this useful for you? How would you apply any of this? Forget about the stereotypes or whatever, but you personally, or so what? It's not relevant to me, perhaps, or your situation, but making it relevant.
Well, can you take this, what we did today, and do it in your own groups? I mean, forget about how they filled it in. Just look at the questions.
The process.
Right? Is there any other communication styles you might want to add to this?
Right.
And then use this in your own groups. You can make a small B5 size copy of the thing, and when you're in a meeting, start ticking off some boxes, just to have yourself an idea of how the meetings are processing. And if you're in a multicultural environment, what maybe the differences of the people you're working with. Because that's real, right? This is theory. And how can you turn this into real value for you? Can you use this, what they're doing here, as a process? Can you apply it yourself and have value from it to manage your meetings or manage your communication?
We don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to share that, but that's an individual process. So experience doesn't count that much, because if you're in your own situation, you have to make your own choices. So experience is, a funny thing, right? It could have been that way for the past 20 years, but it's not longer. It's no longer that way, right? So this is a very personal part of things, and if you're willing to share your experiences, that's great. But let's go to the last group, and then we'll let you tackle the more private, personal ones in your cozy groups. You don't have to share that with everybody, perhaps. How about this group?
Almost everything we try to mention was mentioned.
Mention, okay.
Somehow.
Except?
Except the board is.
We realized that actually our group has kind of found their conclusion, and that was our, sorry for it's kind of a stereotype, and and we cover, because we are kind of a multicultural, bilingual people, and such kind of people can choose the Japanese me and Western American me. Yeah, and it's very important to me. So the non-multicultural team have their people who have different background, but they have only if he is he from the United States, and he have only lived in the United States, and he have this American style communication. And he has American style communication style. In the other one, the Japanese guy, who have